Building a search engine for censored internet content. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the motivation for and philosophy of building a search engine that focuses specifically on censored internet content. Censored can refer to things that are really very explicitly banned by large social media companies and search engines like Google. I'm going to talk about that, as well as things which are shadow banned, which are so far down in the search results in many cases that most people aren't able to see them. Technically, they can find them, but actually they're basically excluded from the conversation in practical ways without actually explicitly banning them. This has become very common the last 4 years since Donald Trump was elected, and it's become super common in the last 6 months since the coronavirus crisis began. It's become the pretext and justification for very heavy censorship, especially by major companies like Google and YouTube, many others. First, let me talk a little bit about the problem and why I think it's happening. And I'm going to try to focus on a critical point, which is that Google, YouTube, Facebook, most search engines, most social media sites are largely or exclusively, in many cases almost exclusively, funded by advertisers. To a large extent, this is true of broadcast television, cable news, and many other information sources that people are relying upon. He who pays the piper calls the tune. Advertisers dictate what you see, whether they do it deliberately, overtly, or not. Everyone who's heavily funded by advertisers thinks very carefully about publishing something that is damaging to an advertiser, especially a very large one. The decline of classified advertising by small businesses, homeowners, and other people in many areas means that the old giant news paper companies, like the San Jose Mercury News where I live, or for that matter probably the New York Times even, they are much more dependent on big giant advertisers like Bill Gates, like pharmaceutical companies, than they used to be, because they used to get a lot of their advertising from local businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, restaurants, all kinds of businesses which significantly are being crushed by the current lockdown as well. Those people being crushed by the lockdown are those people who can't afford to advertise. So let's look at some examples of this. One of the prominent examples is the remarkably friendly coverage of Bill Gates that is now quite universal. This is the Google search results for Bill Gates, and there's very little at the top damaging information about Bill Gates. It's a very positive information. You can see very little here that would make you concerned about Bill Gates. And also, those people who are critical are labeled as conspiracists, like in this article. And down here we have, actually not in this one, but I'll show another example. So often the term conspiracy theorist or conspiracist or conspiracy is used to label criticism of Bill Gates and many other large advertisers. This is DuckDuckGo, which is also advertising funded. It's supposed to be a privacy-based anonymous search engine that doesn't track what you're doing, in contrast to Google. In my experience, that seems to be true. It doesn't appear to be owned by Google. It's a smaller business. However, their search results for Bill Gates are also very positive. Again, the same article from Gizmodo labeling critics of Bill Gates conspiracy theorists. And in this case down here, we can see the bizarre conspiracy theories that Bill Gates caused COVID. Again, it's very positive about Bill Gates. These are mostly very positive accounts. Really damaging information is not showing up at the top and is being ridiculed. Now, these are articles in our small censored search engine from non-mainstream alternative sources. And they have a lot of damaging specific information about Bill Gates and his activities. They also speculate about conspiracies. Some of them do that type of stuff, which you can take with a grain of salt. But there's also a lot of factual information here that paints a very different picture of Bill Gates. And that's the kind of content we're looking for in the search engine, and we're developing algorithms. This is just a popularity contest, the page rank here. So this is based on other alternative sources linking to these articles. But we have AI, artificial intelligence algorithms that specifically look for quantitative factual information, financial information. They try to identify content which is likely to be being censored because it's factual, accurate, and has damaging information on financial conflicts of interest, on the ineffectiveness or actual danger of products such as vaccines and drugs. That's what the censorship is after. The censorship's real purpose is to protect the advertisers and their businesses. That's what they're doing. Now, they are using various political tactics to hide the fact that they're doing that. But the goal here is to sell you something and to hide information that might make you think twice or even not purchase the product. Such as, for example, a rushed experimental vaccine for the coronavirus, a type of disease for which no successful vaccine has ever been created. That's an example, but there are many other examples. Now, this is a critical article on Bill Gates in the Columbia Journalism Review, generally a highly respected professional journal about journalism by Tim Schwab. He's also published some articles in The Nation magazine. This is generally kind of liberal left-wing, and it goes into considerable detail about the sizable amount of money that Bill Gates and his foundation has given to media companies. For example, here, I recently examined nearly 20,000 charitable grants that the Gates Foundation made through the end of June and found more than $250 million going towards journalism. Recipients included news operations like the BBC, NBC, Al Jazeera, ProPublica, National Journal, The Guardian, Univision, Medium, The Financial Times, The Atlantic, The Texas Tribune, Gannett, Washington Monthly, Le Monde, and the Center for Investigative Reporting. Charitable organizations affiliated with news outlets like the BBC Media Action and the New York Times Media Cases Fund, media companies such as Participant, whose documentary Waiting for Superman supports Gates' agenda on charter schools, and it goes on and on. The article contains numerous specific factual examples of Bill Gates' enormous influence on the media, including social media and Google and so on, which we can easily see in search results produced not only by the big market leader Google, but also by the supposedly alternative DuckDuckGo search engine, which is also advertising driven. Bill Gates has a history of making debatable claims and seeming to get very good press coverage. He is one of the wealthiest men in the world, perhaps $100 billion in personal wealth. One thing that drew my attention to him was his role in promoting the false claim that there's a terrible shortage of, in particular, software engineers, but scientists and engineers. I don't want to go into that in too much detail. This is one of the many pieces of evidence that this is not true in the United States. Huge numbers of U.S. students take and pass the challenging AP, Advanced Placement Calculus exams, every year. This number has been soaring since the 1970s at 6 to 7% per year, and it's now over 280,000 students per year. So even if you don't consider that it's accelerating exponentially, there will be approximately 2.8 million nerds, if you will, calculus-trained students produced in the next decade, which is more than enough to fill the requirements of companies like Microsoft, which claim to face a terrible shortage, often pointing the figure at K through 12 public schools, as occurs in the famous or infamous, let's see if we can get down here, right, down here, Waiting for Superman, heavily promotes the idea that we have terrible schools, we have terrible math education in the United States. That's specifically claimed in this video, which was funded by Bill Gates, amongst other people. This is all nonsense, and Bill Gates has testified to Congress claiming that he faces a terrible shortage. Since he did that in 2008, the fall of 2008, Microsoft has laid off over 35,000 of supposedly hard-to-find science and technology workers. Sometimes literally at the same time. One of the largest layoffs took place at exactly the same time that Bill Gates was making these claims in an editorial he published with his close ally Warren Buffett and also with Sheldon Adelson, the casino tycoon. So there's a remarkable difference between reality and some of the things that Bill Gates claims. At best, he has to be close to delusional to believe these things, or he's simply lying. Now, we've seen all kinds of examples of censorship and things that probably are censorship in the last 6 months since the coronavirus. The scale of this has escalated dramatically over the last 6 months. Remarkably, one has the spectacle of Bill Gates being who has no medical degree, no formal training in medicine. His background is in software, and it's really in the business of software. He didn't invent DOS. He actually bought it from somebody else, and DOS is actually a clone of Gary Kildall's CP/M operating system, which has been forgotten today but was very popular in the 1970s and early 80s. He doesn't have a history of advanced algorithm development, of very sophisticated artificial intelligence work, or any of that sort of stuff. He made a very, very good business deal with IBM that catapulted his business to its monopoly position. He certainly appears to be a great negotiator and sort of business poker player. But how much he really knows about technical matters is not so clear. So people talking about hydroxychloroquine have been censored. These include many medical doctors, practicing doctors, and other people, and yet they've been censored. And at the same time, articles were published in The Lancet, which is considered the most premier medical journal in the world, and also the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the top journals in the world in medicine. These were false, blatantly fraudulent articles, and they were retracted under pressure from many scientists, medical doctors, and others who quickly detected that the data they were presenting and the information made absolutely no sense. And yet this was done by the top, supposedly most careful journals in the country. Now, they were in the world. We're not talking about the U.S. We're talking about the entire world. This kind of obvious propaganda was put out by someone. And it was published in the top journals in medical science, which of course are funded by advertisers. There's extensive evidence of some sort of censorship, and it's driven by making money for the advertisers, for the big funders, for the pharmaceutical industry, and very likely for Bill Gates. So what can we do about this? And before I get to that, I also want to discuss and touch on politics, because this censorship is being justified and driven by politics. It's far from trying to avoid political issues. The censorship is being heavily intertwined with political issues such as identity politics, such as supposed purported opposition to fascism and opposition to President Trump. Now, I have very serious concerns about President Trump that I'm not going to go into in this video, as I think most people who look at his history and business activities should have. That's not the point here. The point here is that by using legitimate fears of President Trump and his background, these companies are conflating marketing their products, their services, their vaccines, their drugs, which cost a ton of money, with a political issue. This is not a new phenomenon. It actually has a very long history that goes back at least to the Torches of Freedom movement by public relations pioneer Edward Bernays, actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud, among other claims. And what he did is he linked smoking cigarettes to feminism, to women's equality. Edward Bernays organized the Torches of Freedom event as part of a sophisticated, persuasive campaign. He linked smoking a cigarette to women's fight for equality. So 100 years ago, smoking was popular with men, and women were discouraged from smoking. We now realize that smoking was very unhealthy, so it was actually good that women weren't smoking. What Bernays did, and what is often done in these marketing campaigns, is to play one group against another. Women against men, black people against white people, and you say, our product, the white people get it, the single white men get, or the white men get it, the old white men, they get it, and it's so great. And you're being excluded from this wonderful product. You know, you're not going to get the vaccine. We're so concerned about that inequality. We want to fix that by making sure everyone, especially the marginalized groups, the people who are being forbidden from getting our product. That markets the product to a huge audience, and it creates, in many cases, a fight in which the conservatives typically, or people like that, will say, oh no, we're not excluding people. We're not doing anything like that. You know, there. And on the other hand, the liberals or the feminists or the equalitarians or whatever will be like, we really have to have this because the white people have it. This is one of the tactics. You actually deliberately entangle the product that you are selling or the service that you're selling with these political issues, animosities, flat out hatred in some cases. And the underlying assumption that the product, like cigarettes, is good for you and isn't harmful, and cigarettes were very harmful. There's very extensive evidence that they're harmful, that they either contribute to or cause lung cancer, emphysema, a variety of respiratory problems. But they were able to completely sweep this under the rug with these kinds of marketing campaigns, which also, by the way, claimed that cigarette smoking was good for you. It was actually good for your health, help you breathe better. So it's important to realize that in constructing a ability to do searches for censored content, which is frequently being censored for a hard-nosed, cynical business reason, to portray products like cigarettes as good for you when in fact they're bad for you. And the cigarettes weren't just unnecessary. They weren't just like a bad habit that you're spending money on. They were actually harmful to you, right? They were actually really, really bad for you. But this tactic, this approach, this censorship is being entangled with political issues in order to pull people's, amongst other things, to pull people's attention away from the business motive. So again, Google, YouTube, all of social media, all of these platforms are funded by advertisers almost exclusively. They depend on the advertisers and they promote the interest of advertisers such as Bill Gates and other people and entities. In some cases, they are actually intertwined with the actual business themselves. Google is into all kinds of things. So if you want to look out for your interests and make sure you're not being sold the modern equivalent of cigarettes that's bad for you, bad for your family. I mean, it's not just a waste of your money, but it's actually deadly. If you want that, you need search engines that are not beholden to the advertisers. You need a search engine, or search engines plural, which I think is what we should do. Diversity is a good thing. These are search engines which are not funded by advertisers. They are funded by you, the end user, by subscribers, by donations, by whatever mechanism that allows the person who's buying the product or service, the women who are buying the cigarettes, to actually look up the information for themselves and make a judgment uncontrolled by the advertisers. That's what we need. Now that is doable partly because only a subset of information is being censored. So what we need are search engines which have that information in them, obviously. They go to the websites that are being censored. Secondly, they need intelligence, more than a popularity contest which can be manipulated. They need the ability to look through this content and pick out the information that is likely to be true, that is factual, about the performance of the product or the service. And I would include politicians as a product, and some of them have dark secrets that don't get reported in the major mass media, the advertising funded media. So what is needed is more than a popularity contest. What is needed is an AI type program that looks for that type of content and prioritizes it. And it should be transparent, so you as a user can actually see exactly what is going on, why this particular content is being promoted and ranked highly. So here I have the page rank, which is the number of other alternative websites linking to this particular article. And I also have the count of the number of times Bill Gates appears in the article. I multiply them together and compare that to other articles. It's a simple popularity contest. It's a good first pass. This is loosely the kind of thing Google and other search engines did 20 years ago. But you know what it's doing. You know why it's making this decision. It's not some opaque deep learning program that probably no one, not even the people at Google, really understands what it's doing. Rather, these are explicit, rules-based or mathematical formula-based models. This is a simple multiply, which tell you why this is being promoted. So you can decide, is that a good reason? Secondly, these user-selected algorithms should also be editable. They should be, you can set up your own, you can modify it. We have the capability to rate different websites. So if you say, this website, I just keep finding baloney here, I don't trust it, you can derate that website. Another website you might look at and say, yeah, they have a lot of interesting stuff there. Maybe I don't agree with everything, but that's a good source of information. I'll rate that higher. So the end user, the customer, the paying customer, is in the driver's seat and has transparency, which you don't have with Facebook, with Google. You have no idea what they're doing. Very, very likely they are responding either consciously or unconsciously to the wishes of their advertisers, the people who pay the bills. Whether they're explicitly told, and when you look at the censorship we're seeing where videos are being just flat out banned, it looks a lot like they're being explicitly told, even if they're not. But whether it's done consciously, deliberately, in a highly organized fashion, or it's sort of groupthink, subconscious thinking, it amounts to the same thing from the standpoint of the customer. And again, you don't want to get into something like smoking and buy a product and use a product which is actually deadly to you. It actually shortens your life, as cigarette smoking almost certainly does. And you need to immunize yourself against these sophisticated political tactics to tangle up the marketing of these products, as cigarettes were, with whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, a socialist or a capitalist or whatever you are. If you buy a product like cigarettes that's bad for you and you don't realize it, you've been conned and you've been hurt. So you need to be able to look at substantive factual information that is being suppressed. And that's the goal of our search engine and what we're working on. Now, it's certainly not the easiest task in the world, and there will certainly be hiccups as we develop the system and as other competitors develop such systems. We don't want to have, from a public policy point of view, we don't want to have a single search engine that can be wrong, no matter how well-intentioned the people doing it is, or can be taken over or suborned by the advertisers, as they will surely try to do. So that's sharing the motivation for our search engine and the basic idea of how it's going to work and how it is already working, I should say, to address the problem caused by the enormous power that advertisers now have over search engines, over the internet, over what you see, what you hear, and to protect you against these highly deceptive and sophisticated, often political techniques that are being used by the public relations and advertising people. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.